Take a look at this intersection in Long Island. Notice anything weird? Let's zoom in a little closer. Why does the highway just end like that? It's almost like they were planning on extending it further north, but decided not to do so for one reason or another. That's actually exactly what happened here. This is the northern end of New York State Route 135. When it was designed in the 1960s, they planned on building the highway way further than where it currently ends. And it wasn't going to be just like any other highway. What they planned was going to be the longest suspension bridge in the country by total length. A 10-kilometer bridge connecting Long Island straight to the mainland. For millions of people, it would have meant skipping New York City entirely and avoiding some of the most congested roads in America. So what exactly went wrong here? And why, decades later, is someone trying to bring this project back? Hey, my name is Luis, and today we want to take a closer look at America's impossible bridge to Long Island. Let's say you live here in Port Jefferson, Long Island, and you wanted to drive all the way to Bridgeport, Connecticut. These two cities are separated by only 28 kilometers of water. On a relatively clear day, you could even see the Long Island coast from Seaside Park in Bridgeport. To get across the water, you have two options. The first option is to ride a ferry along with your car across the Long Island Sound. One of America's oldest ferry services operates this exact route with hourly trips that take roughly 1 hour and 15 minutes one way. But in reality, that's probably gonna take even longer. Ferries aren't exactly the fastest nor the most convenient way to travel with a car. Getting in and out of a ferry with a vehicle can be a bit of a hassle. It just takes a couple of minutes, and that's not yet accounting for any delays whatsoever. This ferry ride also costs somewhere between $70 for a car and $400 for a long truck. And that's only for a one-way ticket. That's why some people just simply don't see it as a viable path to cross the Sound. So what's the alternative? For the second option, instead of taking the shorter route across the water, you could drive west through Queens and the Bronx, then all the way northeast along the coast via the I-95. The shortest route, according to Google Maps, will take you somewhere around 2 hours to drive. But that's assuming there's no traffic along the route. Because in the past, this stretch of road has ranked number 1 as the most congested highway in the country. That 2-hour drive is probably closer to 3 hours, maybe even longer. And there's a good reason why this place is notorious for its heavy traffic. This isn't some quiet rural stretch of coastline. This is the heart of the Northeast Corridor. Millions of people live and work around the Long Island Sound. And every single day, traffic funnels through the same two bridges in New York City because it's the only direct path between the two sides of the water. For most people coming from Long Island, this is simply the shortest drive they could take. Which naturally raises the question, why is there no bridge across the Long Island Sound? Wouldn't it make traveling easier for millions of people? Well, the idea definitely isn't new. In fact, there have been multiple proposals in the past to build both bridges and tunnels across the Sound. Some of the earliest concepts date back to the mid-20th century, when planners imagined a direct crossing between Long Island and Connecticut as a way to entirely bypass New York City. I'll show you these crazy proposals in a second. When doing my research for these videos while traveling, I often work from different places. Cafes, airports, hotels. And every time I connect to public Wi-Fi, I'm basically trusting that no one is watching what I'm doing. Most of the time, nothing happens. But if someone was tracking your activity or stealing your data, you probably wouldn't even notice it. That's why I've been using CyberGhost for a while now, and I've mentioned it here many times before. It runs in the background, encrypts your traffic, and just makes everything a lot more private and secure, especially when traveling. And on top of that, you can access up to 40% more content on streaming platforms and even find better deals online. CyberGhost now has over 38 million users and a really great rating on Trustpilot. It's super easy to use, works across 100 countries plus, and you can use it on up to 7 devices at the same time. So that means you can share it with family and friends. And right now, they're offering 84% off plus 4 whole months for free, with a 45-day money-back guarantee. So you can try it out completely risk-free and see if it's worth it. If you want to check it out, go to cyberghostvpn.com/megabuilds or use our link in the description. Now, let's take a look at the insane ideas for crossing the Sound. Over the decades, routes like Oyster Bay to Rye, Port Jefferson to Bridgeport, Shoreham to New Haven, and even Orient Point to East Lyme were all seriously studied. On paper, many of these routes looked fairly reasonable. These weren't exactly short crossings, but they were definitely not impossible to build. Take the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway in Louisiana, for example. Spanning more than 38 kilometers across, it holds the record for the world's longest continuous bridge over water. Just a little to the west, there's also the Manchac Swamp Bridge at almost 37 kilometers long. With both bridges spanning more than 35 kilometers, these are well and beyond the length needed to cross the Long Island Sound. Clearly, length alone was never the deal breaker. So how is this different? While the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway is famously long, it's built over a lake that's extremely shallow. Lake Pontchartrain averages just 3 to 4 meters deep, and in many places it's even less than that. This allowed engineers to use relatively short piles, simple foundations, and highly repetitive construction methods. Perfect conditions for a bridge that stretches on for tens of kilometers. But the Long Island Sound is a different story. On average, it's about 20 meters deep, with some parts towards the east dipping to more than 100 meters. That might not sound extreme, but for a bridge, quadrupling the water depth dramatically changes everything. This means longer piles, heavier piers, more complex installation, and far higher costs. And yet, even this kind of depth isn't unheard of. Plenty of major crossings around the world have built in waters just as deep, or even deeper. And that's where the real debate begins. Not if a Long Island crossing is physically possible, but how exactly it should be built. And for nearly 90 years, engineers have been stuck on this same question. Basically, there are 3 different ways we could build a connection over the Long Island Sound. So let's start with the first and most obvious one: building a bridge. The other 2 options are definitely more extreme than this one, but let's just start simple. One of the most recent proposals came from Connecticut real estate developer Stephen Shapiro. In his 2025 plan, he envisions a 22.5 kilometer bridge stretching from Bridgeport to this exact point right here. Much like Route 135, the highway on this side also ends abruptly right before the shoreline. That existing infrastructure makes it a great starting point for a new crossing. Given the bridge's length, most of it would likely be constructed as a beam bridge. This type of bridge is widely considered to be the simplest to construct, only consisting of 2 vertical piers from where the deck would be placed on top of. Well, that's basically how the principle works. But as simple as this is, it becomes a problem for ships navigating the waters below the bridge. The space between these pillars will not be wide enough for ships to safely pass right through. One wrong turn could prove to be far too dangerous. So, to avoid this, Shapiro's plan calls for the bridge to have a main suspension span to allow ships to freely pass underneath and make transit safer. Since the cables carry most of the load, suspension bridges can span much greater distances, allowing the towers to be placed far enough apart for safe passage below. Shapiro's plan also calls for a potential rail line that would connect the busy Northeast Corridor directly to Long Island. In total, he estimates the bridge could be built with a budget of $50 billion. Yeah, $50 billion. To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire GDP of some countries. All for just one bridge. This would make the project one of the country's most expensive public works projects to date. On the surface, a bridge seems like the simplest answer. It's the most visible option, the most straightforward to construct, and on paper, the cheapest. Which is insane, considering it costs $50 billion. But the other proposals I'll cover in a moment are even more insane than this one. The problem with a bridge like this is that you'd need enormous approach roads, cutting straight through coastal towns, wetlands, and protected shorelines. And this is basically one of the main reasons why many residents are opposed to the idea. Beyond the bridge itself, the real footprint of the project would sprawl far inland. Opposition against it doesn't come from engineers saying it's not possible, but from residents basically saying, not in my backyard. So if a bridge above the water causes too much disruption on land, the next logical idea is to hide the connection entirely. Instead of going over the sound, what if we went under it and built a tunnel? This is what this developer proposed back in 2008. A tunnel at least 26 kilometers long that would run from here to here. To build this tunnel, there are 2 main options. The first involves lowering massive prefabricated tunnel sections onto the seafloor using specially designed ships. This method, known as an immersed tube tunnel, is both easier and cheaper to construct. It's the same technique currently being used for the Fehmarnbelt tunnel between Denmark and Germany. The second option will make use of massive tunnel boring machines, where crews would excavate from both sides and slowly work towards the middle. A good example of this is the Channel Tunnel between the UK and France. But tunneling like this comes with its own brutal constraints. You can't stay too close to the seabed, or the ground above collapses, so you have to go deep enough that the surrounding soil and rock can actually hold itself together. This means long underground approaches and complex ventilation systems. And the deeper and longer the tunnel gets, the more expensive it becomes. That's when a third and final idea emerged, a hybrid bridge-tunnel system. Part bridge, part tunnel, connected by artificial islands in the middle of the sound. This is actually the exact same system that's used in the longest sea crossing in the world, the 55-kilometer Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. And according to a 2017 feasibility study, this was also the option the New York Department of Transportation considered the most often for further study. The report outlined several possible alignments for the crossing, and out of the 5 deemed feasible, 3 relied on a bridge tunnel design. One of the proposed routes was a connection from here to here. Similar to Shapiro's bridge proposal, this hybrid system connects to the same road on the Long Island side. The idea is that cars would start here in this intersection, where a tunnel would bypass dense residential areas on the surface. Then, the tunnel rises back up to the surface through an artificial island a few kilometers off the shore from Connecticut. Next, the central bridge span could be built as a simple beam bridge, as ships can now cross where the tunnels are located. Finally, the bridge lowers back to an artificial island and then turns into a tunnel that exits here in Long Island. From an engineering perspective, this actually solved several problems at once. Ships could pass freely and coastal impacts could be reduced. But there was one catch. This option was estimated to cost roughly twice as much as building a bridge alone. And if we were to use the $50 billion estimate from Shapiro's proposal, this hybrid system could cost as much as $100 billion. And for a project that was already pushing the limits of scale, that price tag changed everything. A hybrid system might be the best technical solution, but it's also the hardest to justify from a financial standpoint. So once again, the same pattern repeated itself. A bridge would have been too disruptive, a tunnel would be too expensive, and the hybrid solution would be kind of both at the same time. And that's how, for nearly 90 years, every single proposal to cross the Long Island Sound has ended the same way. But what do you think? Is the Long Island crossing inevitable? Or is this a project that's better left unbuilt? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to try CyberGhost VPN, use our link in the description for 84% off plus 4 whole months for free. You can use CyberGhost on up to 7 devices at the same time and share it with family and friends. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching.